Hey, what's going on? This is Rad with another awesome episode of SOFREP Radio. Now, today is a return guest, and you already know who it is because you've already clicked on the title. I've learned that. I'm like trying to hide who the guest is. I can't tell you till I tell you about the merch store, right? I always do that. Go check out sofrep.com/merch and pick up some branded items from our merch store, right? The SOFREP lighters, the torch lights that we have, super cool. Lots of lumens, very bright in a dark place. I also have my fireplace going, so thank you for buying the merch. Second, we have the book club. You hear me say it all the time. That's sofrep.com /book-club. Now that's book-club. Go read a book. Even if it's not from the book club, go read a book. Find a book. Now today is the author of a book. Okay, so Curtis Fox joins us today, and he has written Hybrid Warfare, the Russian Approach to Strategic Competition and Conventional Military Conflict, the Russian Way. Now, Curtis, this book came out a little bit beginning of 2024 into 2023, and it's out right now where everyone can go find Hybrid Warfare under Curtis Fox, who comes from the 10th Special Forces Group. All right. Green Beret, Special Forces. And we're going to get into it about what's happening, kind of what's going on right now in Ukraine. Welcome to the show, Curtis.
Hey, thank you very much for having me, Rad. It's good to see you again.
It's great to have you back. You know, last time we talked, we were getting into, how you're such a subject matter expert, a SME, someone who has an understanding of what's going on over in Eastern Europe and like, not just like in Russia, but like Warsaw, like the whole entire shebang. Yeah.
Well, I try, but yeah, it's been a fun project, and it's been a lot of fun doing the research on it, and it's been the subject of a couple of my recently posted papers. Like who in NATO is actually ready for war. This was actually posted in Military Review recently, and I'd love to get into it. Why aren't sanctions working on Russia?
Yeah, well, why aren't they? Why aren't sanctions? Well, they probably are somewhat, but why aren't they? What we think should be working, right? Who's helping them? Who are the actors?
Well, it's a fascinating case study because the sanctions regime that's been erected against Russia has kind of horrified the Chinese and the Iranians. But Russia is unique. They are one of the world's largest energy producers. They're on par with Saudi Arabia, and most of that oil and gas is going to Western Europe. And then on top of that, they're the world's largest grains producer. And so the quality of Russian farmland is actually relatively poor, but they have an enormous amount of it. Yeah. And it's kind of one of these funny things. The Volga River is a relatively small river compared to other major bodies of water like, the Mississippi, the Rhine. But for the Russians, it's a superhighway, and it brings all that grain to market. If to cut Russia totally out of the world economy, immediately would have produced mass famine, especially in the Middle East and Africa, where a lot of the Russian grains are exported. But it would also produce an energy crisis almost immediately. The Germans, in particular, have very much integrated economically with Russia. Russia produces a lot of the raw materials that the high-powered German industrial machine needs. And it's not just a recent innovation. I mean, that was the case, dating back to World War II. That was the backbone of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact between Germany and the Soviet Union. It was not merely a non-aggression pact. The Germans rebuilt the Wehrmacht and then the Luftwaffe with raw materials out of the Soviet Union. And that economic relationship, has created, I don't want to say an alliance of convenience, but they have aligned interests. And it took Russia invading Ukraine to really disturb Berlin to such a point that they were willing to break that economic relationship with Russia. And now the Europeans are learning exactly how difficult it is to kind of unenthrall themselves from Russian energy exports. And they've been more successful with natural gas, which relies on pipelines, but crude is a little bit easier to ship to alternative third-party destinations. And so it's very easy for third-party countries to basically, just take a middleman handler's fee and then ship it to Europe. And so Europe is getting Russian oil, but it looks like it passed through India or it passed through Turkey or, another middleman partner.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the
straw
Russians,
man. Right.
Yeah, they cannot turn off those oil wells either, especially not in the Urals, because they're in the permafrost and they don't have the technology to turn them back on.
Because it's always cold, it has to stay warm. Like your pipes have to keep dripping in the winter, or else they'll freeze up, and so they have to always just keep it going. So like that's what the whole thing about trying to annex Crimea, Russia trying to take over Crimea, is about: the pipeline and the port and the whole outlet to the ocean right there for what we call the breadbasket of the world, right?
Yes, that's definitely a part of it. The Sevastopol naval base is also in Crimea, and Crimea is not just a strategic location for oil and gas. It's also it's the means through which Russia projects their naval power into the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea and the Indian Ocean. And for Russia to lose the Sevastopol naval base and dominance in the Black Sea is to basically sever their capacity to project power in a large portion of the world.
They should probably just look at America's fleet and how much we love our boats and just say that's the same thing right now. We love our boats. Don't touch our boats.
Don't touch our boats.
Don't touch our boats. Don't do it. Don't you do it. Don't you do it. Don't you do it. So, I mean, you can either battle us about our boats, or you can just think they're really serious about their boats. And that's to all of you out there on your boats. Okay. Kick some butt. Now, right now on the boats, kind of talking current here, you have a strike group going over to the sea in between Iran and trying to flex right now. A whole carrier group's going over there. You've got another front in Ukraine going on that's being escalated into Russia-held occupational territory. You've got, and Russia's now starting to have to, do we have to go underground? Do we hide our people or walk around freely in a city where they're blowing up freely, walking around people in a city? So it's kind of coming back at Russia. So you have US is definitely out there. I think we're trying to stay off the Iranian situation. Okay. Hey, we're here, F-18s, inland, lots of things that can fly, lots of really powerful equipment that we have on our boats. Russia, chill out, back off, let Ukrainian people just have a regular place. What do you think? Should they just back off? Should they just stop? Yeah. Give Ukraine up. Just stop pushing in on it. Cause you think anybody's going to let it ever go to them?
Well, I don't think that there's a lot of middle ground in the case with Russia. Mm-hmm. Russia exists on the vast northern Eurasian steppe, and they don't really have any geographic barriers. And so for most of Russia's history, their only way to achieve a degree of security was simply to grow and expand and absorb those new tribes and ethnicities that they encountered into the Russian collective. And so by the time of, the czars, that Russia had evolved already into a multi-ethnic empire. And that was really the only form of government that they could have mastered. Since the time of Peter the Great, and Catherine the Great, Lenin, Stalin, and now Vladimir Putin, the goal has always been to grow Russia so that they can anchor their political boundaries on hard geographic barriers. So that would be, the Gobi Desert. That would be the Carpathian Mountains in the west. That would be the Baltic Sea, the Black Sea. That would be the Caucasus Mountains to the southwest. And that's the strategy that Vladimir Putin is pursuing. Stalin actually reached the apogee of that strategy at the end of World War II, and he conquered all the countries of Eastern Europe, and he wrestled them, under into Moscow's orbit. And then he had heavy ground forces and tactical nuclear ordnance forward stationed in East Germany on the western side of the Fulda Gap. That is the Russian definition of security. That strategic paradigm collapsed with the collapse of the Soviet Union, And Russia is now that they've regained a degree of stability under Vladimir Putin, they're pursuing the same strategy. And, it's going to take them a long time to ever, potentially regain that defense in depth. But when we see all of these little, military interventions, the Crimean annexation, or maybe the Russo-Georgian War in 2008, the war in Syria, all of these little interventions and skirmishes are in service of those larger strategic goals. And what we absolutely cannot allow to happen is for the Russians to think that they can sneak, as Vladimir Putin termed them, little green men, Spetsnaz troops, conducting some sort of a soft coup in Warsaw, let's say. And let's just say they start doing cross-border bombardments into Poland or something like that, like they did with, in the pre-hour engagements before the Russo-Georgian War actually became hot, or, the little green men that basically seized control of the Crimean parliamentary building in 2014. The Poles have been. Well, first they endured systematic extermination under the Germans, and then after that they endured another 40 years of slavery under communism at the direction of Moscow. And they are not going to allow themselves to ever be dominated by an outside power again. Oh. And, when the Russians do these little passive-aggressive things to try to move the ball forward in pursuit of these larger strategic goals, I guarantee you the Poles will have none of it. And so the strategic calculus in us supporting Ukraine is to make sure that the Russians can never border, some of our major NATO partners that might invoke Article 5 and drag us into a grand war against the regime in Moscow. And that's really the reason that we have a strategic interest in ensuring that the government in Kiev survives.
Dang. Yeah, right. And also not to think that it's not beneath the Russian Empire of today. If he wants to go back to being called that, they're sending missiles through the airspace of neighboring countries right now. They're like also hitting facilities within those. Like, didn't it hit Poland in this current conflict that they're in right now in Ukraine? Wasn't there like something about a missile that had hit inside of the country, and they're like, hey, it was a Russian missile that cut through the airspace to get into Ukraine, right? They don't care.
Yeah, that was a nasty black eye. And everybody in that particular engagement immediately rushed to say that, hey, look, this might not have been a Russian missile, number one, but number two, if it was a Russian missile, it was an accident, and none of this was on purpose, and this is all something that we should just forget about. And they all, the State Department and a number of NATO allies immediately were on top of that. And the reason for that is because that Jacob's ladder can escalate very quickly and very dangerously. So it's important to make sure that, it's a tense situation, let's just say. And it's important to make sure that you have a fire extinguisher handy.
I mean, really, they don't want you to remember, but Pepperidge Farms remembers. Okay. It's like, okay, yeah, can't pull one over. I mean, especially if you lived through the situation and kind of saw things or heard things, or news flash that's just in. Everybody's on the ground immediately. TikTok's going off. Some kids filming the burning building. It's like you can't get away from really what's going down these days, which also, inflates the situation heavily. Because it just takes one crazy social media post to like send the algorithm into a flurry, sending it to people who believe propaganda.
Yeah, it's a big problem. It's unfortunately too, we're starting to, there's a problem first where, people are proving to be quite susceptible to propaganda. One. Two, there's also emerging a somewhat of a consensus amongst governments that they have the right to control information flows over their respective populations. And it's very, very difficult to manage these things. I would consider it analogous to the emergence of the printing press in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
We're dabbling in new technologies in the age of the internet and the age of social media that have never been tried before. They in many ways, social media is playing a role right now in global politics that the emergence of the printing press and the targeted political pamphlet and pamphleteering campaigns played in the French Revolution. And that's kind of a terrifying prospect as to where this can go and how this can end up if we are not level-headed.
Yeah, really, because I mean, when I was working for this internet company back in early 2000s, the internet was only like 15 years old. Okay. And we would always talk about it as, she's only 15 years old. What happens to a 15-year-old? What's going through, what's a 15-year-old going through in their life? And now all of a sudden you flash forward, it's another 15 years from that time when I was doing that. And now she's 30 years old. So what is a 30-year-old just going to be doing? The internet is just becoming, we don't even know the power of what TikTok can do. Like, you think it's just going to show you selling your shoes online,
Sure.
or, but it can be the power of it. It can either like say, hey, look at this person did this, or start a war. Maybe a keystroke, not a gunshot, is what creates this situation to be nasty. It's more of a keystroke type situation. It's happening also within our own country, right? We have our own blood on blood Americans, if you will, just kind of like looking at each other like, well, are we all Americans or what? Like we should all just be under the same flag, but it's just kind of a divisive situation out there with social media. And I just want to kind of call it out. I'm not saying anything specific because, you got to just know what you're looking at. You just got to realize, I don't know, how do you fact check what something seems to be fact checked? How do you just go with your gut?
Well, I can tell you one positive thing that has emerged at the diplomatic level that has gotten some press attention recently in our relationship with Russia is we've had that recent prisoner exchange,
right?
And that's a reoccurring indicator that we have some back channels that are open with the Russians, and we are not entirely at the whims of the whiplash effect of let's say social media, stigmatizing a particular issue that then has to drive government policy on that particular issue. We are at least able to exchange information with them in a substantive way, and I think that's a very, very positive sign. And it wasn't a particularly good deal, and we can kind of get into the mechanics of the deal a little bit, but the fact that we're talking to them in a substantive way is very encouraging.
Right, because they didn't have to do anything. They could have left their guy alone and just left, it was Paul, right? Paul Whelan, who was serving a 16-year prison sentence. And he had been excluded from prior high-profile dealings involving Russia, including in the 2022 swap of the Marine veteran Trevor Reed, but they finally got him back August 2nd, 2024. And I think we all saw President Biden meet him and like tell him welcome home and take his American flag off, just like kind of like a dad. I just have to say, I watched that situation and he was just like, what do I have on me right now that I can just give you to let you know, here you go, here's your flag, welcome home. And I don't know, I don't think you can, it just got done, right? He came home, he's home now. So do we have others still over there that are waiting to come home, or did we get the last of those guys?
I'm sure we still have more political prisoners in Russia.
Yeah.
And Whelan wasn't, he was one of 16, I think. Another one was a Wall Street Journal journalist.
That's right.
A lot of the people that we traded for, a few of them weren't even Westerners. They were members of Alexei Navalny's campaign staff.
Right.
And so, we glorified Navalny maybe a little too much in the West. I think we kind of misunderstand him a little bit. That's a separate conversation. But as a potential liberal reformer in Russia, he was a sharp critic of the Kremlin, and he insisted on seeing changes made in Russia and Russian policy. And we need to applaud him for that. And the Kremlin basically, they had him killed. They harassed him politically for years, and finally he was eliminated as a threat.
And they were trying to get him and his kid and his family and anybody around him and anybody who was for him. They kept changing the rules if you like Navalny in Russia. So
Sure.
from he's not a political prisoner. Okay, maybe he's a political prisoner. If you like him now, you're going to be looked at that way. And now he's a terrorist. Now you're part of a terrorist organization. Oh, now it's a banned organization. It's not even allowed anymore. And if you even say his name, you're going to be shot. It's kind of gotten to that point.
And it's unfortunate that we had to trade, the people that we traded to the Russians were almost all of them deep cover Russian spies. Whether they were working for the GRU or the FSB or maybe one or two of them for the SVR. I don't think the administration has released, they've told us who. I don't think they've announced officially what agencies these individuals worked for. I've seen it on open source media, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's true. But all of these guys were allegedly deep cover Russian operatives. So the old, the Soviet Union had the old Comintern program. There's a little fascinating history behind Russian deep cover spies if you want to go into it. So, during the Soviet experiment with communism, during the 20s and 30s, there were still many in the West that were very enamored with the idea of communism. And so they went to Russia to watch the experiment. And a lot of them came from the Western universities. Stalin in particular treated them with a great deal of suspicion. Some of them were true believers, and he had them come back to the West to basically work as spies in the institutions of the West. But a lot of them were killed. They were simply purged in the late 30s, along with a large portion of the officer corps of the Red Army, which is why Russia performed so poorly in the Winter War when they invaded Finland. To replace all of these intellectuals who had been working as spies, they started the Comintern program, which was meant to take Russian peasants and train them in language and basic trade crafts so that they could be spies. And out of that Comintern program eventually evolved this thing called the Illegals program, which was a top secret program within the KGB, where they would basically, go into a foreign country and they would pretend as though they had been citizens in that country their entire lives and they were born and raised there. And then they would try to, navigate their careers into the institutions and report on that. There's a legacy that still, functions from that. It's run by the SVR, the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service. And they still train, deep cover operatives, and they will take, like a birth certificate from a child in, let's say, Canada or the United States or the United Kingdom, or, pick the Western country.
Right.
And they will take, that birth certificate from that child that probably died in childbirth, or maybe they died early in life for whatever reason. And they'll construct a paper trail that as though that child had grown up to adulthood. And when that, then they'll have their person go to that country and assume that identity that they've created the paper trail for. And it gets more fascinating because, now we're in the digital age. And so they're creating the old digital paper trail for it. But it gets even more fascinating because very often what they'll do is they will take, a man and a woman who have, let's say, compatible personalities and seem to get along fairly well in training. And then they'll just say, well, hey, look, why don't you guys get married here in Russia? And so you can be married officially. And then you're going to go to the West and you're going to assume these two separate identities, and you're going to magically meet at a university, and you're going to get married and date, and you're going to get married in the presence of Western friends. You're going to grow up and raise a family in the West, and you're going to have children in the West, and everyone's just going to think that you're a normal Canadian family or an American family or whatever. And, and so in this particular prisoner exchange, the people that we gave to Russia were all these very, very expensive, highly trained career deep cover operatives. And two minors went with them. So we gave the Russians 8 individuals plus 2 minors, and those minors were most likely, kids, Western kids of that relationship that had only been raised in the West. The last big prisoner exchange we did was in 2010, and that was this big illegals ring that the FBI uncovered in the United States. And there was two of these kids, they were the children of these Russian spies, and they had believed they were Canadian their whole lives, and they were deported to Russia. And they're like, we don't even speak Russian, and so they're suing to try to get their Canadian citizenship back, which is very funny.
Because they were born there, and the parents were living the lie, and then the kids were just part of the plot. They were just, they were a prop.
You have to feel bad for them, because their lives were flipped upside down. But if I were the Canadian government, I would do the same thing.
Well, what you were, it was all just a farce. Go back, yeah, it was a farce. It wasn't even, it was all. Wow, I didn't even think about the minors, being possibly the children of the embedded spies that have been over here, and Red Dawn, it's among us, huh? Holy cow.
It really is. And I tell you where this gets really interesting. So the Europeans, we've been pestering the Europeans for years to take Russian intelligence seriously. The Russians, they have a couple of cardinal characteristics about collection. Part of it is it depends on who in Russia is collecting on you, right? So the SVR is known for being very chic and sophisticated, and they will assess a target for a decade, waiting for the right opportunity to bump this person and approach them with a proposition. Probably when they're low in their career or something bad just happened to them and they need support, or maybe they're in debt. The GRU, almost all the GRU spies, and the GRU runs about 6 times more operatives abroad than the SVR does. But almost all of them are former Spetsnaz men. And so they approach it with a very, military demeanor. They look very physically fit. They look like, a veteran looks. And they tend to approach a problem in terms of, this is the solution we need. This is the leverage we have. So this is the amount of force that we have to apply with this particular tool. And they're not as appreciative of the sensitivities of international relations, which is why you hear about the GRU doing ham-fisted things like a coup in Montenegro or the assassination attempt on Sergei Skripal in the UK. That one hand-fisted attempt cost Russia the using nerve agent on foreign soil to assassinate this guy.
Right.
The Europeans all collaborated together to expel something like 150 career Russian intel officers from Europe. And then maybe I think another 50 were expelled from the United States, all persona non grata. And so the strategic intelligence that Russia lost from that one ham-fisted thing was extraordinary, which is why the head of the GRU was very quietly relieved, and he later died from stress.
Now,
we don't know if that was what kind of stress that was. Maybe he accidentally fell in a lake with tied to a chair. We don't know. But.
I know, right? And here in Utah, we had for some time a Russian base out in the desert. I know where that's at. It's now just, you can go there, and if you go into it, you can still find old magazines from like the 90s, maybe early 90s, when they had to just leave. Like all of a sudden something happened and everybody had to just like leave the country, get out. It was like something about the And this base still exists out here. I've been out there. We filmed a movie at it. It's used as a location, and we were kind of wandering around this whole old base, and everything was all in Russian. And I was just looking at it. I'm like, I've been in Utah like pretty much my whole adult life, and I don't ever recall, ever hearing about this base out here. And there it is, and I was like, wow, is it healthy to be here? Like, did the production crew like get a Geiger counter out here? And it's a whole bunch of like Quonset huts that go in the base, in the ground. And it's still set up. It's just like they left everything just laid out, clipboards, magazines. It's just, so we had an alliance with them at one point. We were talking.
So they probably did literally stop and leave. They probably got a call from Moscow that said, hey, look, the KGB is collapsing. The Soviet Union is collapsing. Come back, get out of the country while you can. One of the things that happened in the fall of the Soviet Union was that the KGB basically lost all of the funding lines that allowed it to run its front companies and to pay its agents abroad. And so the first chief director of the KGB would eventually evolve into the SVR. But there were a couple of early years there where they lost almost all of their foreign intelligence collection apparatus, simply because they didn't have a means of moving money abroad. That had to all be rebuilt. And it's, when you have a facility like that and you've got personnel that are running it and using it, and then suddenly all their resources are cut off, and you have to call them and tell them that, hey, like there's political chaos here and there's every opportunity that somebody's going to flip and it's going to burn you guys. We highly recommend you get out of country. I have a feeling almost every one of them, took that warning seriously.
Literally. And left. Yeah. Cause it's just like the place, if you knew where this was, you'd be like, yeah, Rad, this is in the middle of nowhere. And they just left. Right.
I mean, but here's the other thing too: is the KGB had units like Vimpel, and Vimpel still exists. It's run by the FSB now. But Vimpel was literally responsible for decapitating foreign governments in the event of war. Yeah. And the Vimpel operatives were recruited primarily from the illegals program, right? So they all learned 3 foreign languages, and they were trained as spies before they started getting tier 1 special missions unit training. They were, these were people that were very, very well trained in infiltrating countries and eliminating political and military leadership. That unit still exists today. And they had always planned on using their operatives abroad to facilitate their, Vimpel's country access. Mm-hmm. So it's, I would imagine that facility was set up for a reason, and that they had a particular purpose in mind for it.
Yeah, something about the nuclear program or something along those lines, and they were sharing scientists with the U.S., and that was their area. Mm-hmm. And I remember growing up, my dad being Green Beret out here in Utah, we would go up and down I-15, and he'd always point as we were going to like Camp Williams. He'd say, "You see those lights on the mountains out there?" He's like, "Those are Russians." And I was like, "Oh," and it was called Hercules back in the day. And I'd look over there and I'd always think to myself, those orange lights that went down the mountain with this like 7 shape configuration. Every day I'd see that when we drive by, and I'd be like, "Oh, that's the Russians." He'd always point that out. Yeah. Right there. I could like literally look out my window here in Sandy, Utah, and look to the face of the mountain over where Kennecott Copper, the world's largest pit mine, is located across my valley right here. Just to the north of it, on the same face, was a place called Hercules. And wow,
that is crazy.
That's a place that I don't know what's going on there today or what's happened then, but the place I was talking about, the desert place, it's deserted. That place is deserted. This is right here in the city, in the valley. And so he would always just point out, hey, Russians are right there. I was like, okay, called you out, Hercules. Comment down below. Go ahead, comment down below. And then also, I was learning, or maybe I was just knowledgeable about this, but isn't there like a destabilization process to like try to decapitate a country's democracy and cause it to go into like a sown discord of civil war that Putin kind of has a play list of where he can like try to help devalue the currency, sow discourse and like all these different types of, step one, step two, three, He's going down right now.
So, I mean, this is the essence of my book, right? This is the thesis I have under Russian hybrid warfare. And yes, it's, when they need to bring a neighbor to heel, let's say. A very good example is Ukraine during the Crimean annexation, or maybe Georgia. It starts with sanctions and, debt pressure. They'll use whatever energy leverage they have. So in the case of Ukraine, in the war in Donbass and the Crimean annexation in 2014, they insisted that they could renegotiate all the national gas contracts so that the Ukrainians could get a little more of a dividend. But then when the Ukrainians didn't take the bait, they informed Ukraine that all the gas flows were being cut off immediately, and you're going to have to forward pay for everything that you want. And that, that causes a panic attack amongst the industry leaders, and they start lobbying Kiev. Then the next, if that doesn't get them what they want, in 2014, they were trying to prevent Ukraine from joining the European Union. Then the next step is to start creating protests and riots. Maybe you start bribing some public officials to not send out the police to put down those mass protests. You might bribe certain members of the military to keep their units bottled up on garrison. And then the next step is to start, moving your operatives into country and targeting those protests to seize terrain and erect barricades that frustrate civil services from being able to respond to problems in country and to maneuver freely. And then you might actually start bringing in soft elements that secure key objectives, eliminate key critical leadership, and then ultimately, whatever those gains are that you're trying to make, you're gonna surge in heavy ground forces to relieve the soft units that do the initial contact, so that you can entrench those gains, and that's essentially the process of hybrid warfare. So the three terms that the Russians use to describe this are maskirovka, which is Russian for camouflage, but it essentially means that they want to operate through a hidden hand. Then aktivnost, which is activity, and that simply means all the little things that you're doing to frustrate the host nation government, the target nation's government, to respond to the crisis. And then vyniezopnost, which means surprise, and that's the speedy, that's the speedy seizure of limited objectives to achieve your campaign goals. And those three things together are, I argue, the defining characteristics of a Russian hybrid war.
Wow. So I'm not trying to cause any panic here, but that would have been a good opportunity during the 2020, 2021, 2022 timeframe when, everybody was up at arms over, civil liberties happening in different cities around America. There was a lot of actors that were getting involved that all of a sudden, it's kind of what you just described a little bit. The
GRU troll farms, there's degrees of hybrid warfare, right? So, they're not interested in any sort of a kinetic engagement with the United States. But, with Western countries, the strategy that's worked so well for the Kremlin for most of its existence has been to find creases and cracks in the political fissures between factions in the West, and then put a pry bar in between those things. That's how you make sure that you can break up coalitions that could ever have the capacity to unite and march eastward towards Moscow. That they're thinking about the Grand Armée under Napoleon or the Wehrmacht under the Nazis. And that's, that what they want to do is make sure there's never another coalition like that can ever entertain going east. And so, when there is a Black Lives Matter protest, but then there's also, some sort of a Make America Great Again rally. That what the trolls will do is, see if we can get both of those accidentally scheduled on the same day in the same town center. And it would be very unfortunate if those two groups of people came in contact with one another.
Right.
And, those are the kind of tactics that they employ.
Would that be like chasing your political rival town to town and setting up your political campaigns on their political campaigns to try to bring your crew to their crew? Is that same type of where they might just cross paths like that, whether it's in the grocery stores and you have, say like I'm holding a rally over here for side A and all of my people are coming over to see that rally. And then side B has a rally the same day, like you said, in the same area. And someone's got to go get gas at the store. And the two people that are going to be crossing paths are just kind of pawns in the game, huh?
Yeah, it can be. That can be the case. They do this a lot more in Europe than they do in the United States. I think it shocks us when it happens a little bit because, truth be told, it hasn't really been proven that social media, that Russian troll farms and social media can really move the needle in campaigns, let's say. But they can turn the temperature up for sure.
Yeah.
And they're quite more active in Europe, where there's in some of those countries there's less social stability. They've got a much more inverted demography, which sets the let's say the young tax base that feels quite outnumbered, and they're supporting all these massive pension systems through very limited means. And that falls on some sympathetic ears in Europe in certain cases, and especially in the Eastern European countries. Those that have been under the Russian yoke before, let's say principally Poland, Romania, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, they're watching very closely, and they're trying to police these kinds of things, but.
Moldova, right? Moldova's watching, right? Is that right?
Moldova, yeah.
Big time, right? Like that's almost like probably what he wants to like suck up next.
But, like the Catalonia independence movement in Spain, is getting lots of Russian backing. Because like, why not interfere in Spain?
Right.
Like, why not? Like, what does that cost us? It's nothing.
No. Africa. Why not? Yeah. Why not? They want some grain, here you go. And now they like us and trying to get that, charisma even. Same with, the guy he's meeting all the time from China, the president over there.
The Russian strategy in the Sahel is fascinating. And Wagner is very active down there. They're transforming into the Africa Corps.
Right.
They're backing a number of military juntas and dictatorships that have overthrown elected governments. And all of those countries, the argument for their rule is essentially that, look, the elected and Western-backed governments have done a very poor job of protecting the public from international terrorism, one. And two, no one is seeing any real, economic benefits, let's say, number two. Mm-hmm. And so the Russians come in and they say, look, we'll guard your mineral resources and your mines. We just want a dividend. And we'll train your security forces. And we're not afraid to go out and fight with you. And we'll go fight JNIM with you directly. And we have no problem laying some bodies out. And we're not going to say anything about human rights abuses or anything. The one thing that we ask is that you throttle natural gas exports to Europe. And the idea of, behind that, with whatever countries they're working with in Africa is to throttle those resources, whether it's gas, oil, or other commodities.
Lithium, whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Send those things to Russia. We'll pay you for them, and then we'll figure out how to export them to other countries. And, they're creating leverage.
Yeah, they are. And that's something to be thought about. Right. And, I don't know. I grew up in a very, different time. 1983 was the little red beta video that we watched Red Dawn on at my dad's Green Berets buddy's house, Jerry. And, we were hanging out there, bro. And it's the 35th anniversary right now as we're talking this year of Red Dawn. And I know there was a part 2 out there, but if you go see the first one, please go see the first Red Dawn 1983 movie, 84, and just check it out. The new one has Chris Hemsworth in it, I think, Thor, right? He's in that, but the old one has Patrick Swayze and the Radiator, and it just kind of gives you a sense of Wolverines and what Wolverines are and what we should all be Wolverines about. Okay, I just want to say Wolverines, bro. Okay, because I sat in my dad's office. I would not go to 7th grade. I just didn't have a good time at school. And it was his armory was at the same junior high that I went to, funny enough. So the wrestlers used the gym, the PE teachers used the gym, the teachers upstairs used it for math. And then during the rest of the day, it was all guard. It was all 19th group. It was all theirs. They would take their rucks off. I'd see the gym in a different light. I would see all the guys standing, getting off of like some deployment and taking all their gear off and then going to see the families while everybody else is watching a basketball game. So I'm growing up in a little office janitor's closet, and it's got this film in there that I can just pull any film off of the wall and put it in and slide it over. And it's like T-90 tank. It's like, and I can just go slow with the film and see like all about the T-90 tank and all of its armament. And then it goes like, I can pick out the RPG. And I loved watching and sitting there scrolling the RPG and watching all the different flared out versions of its rockets that they had. So I've grown up very Warsaw understanding, right, of all of that kind of like stuff from 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 years old. I still feel that way. I'm just saying, Curtis, there's just something in the back of my mind that just says the empire wants to resurrect itself. When David Hasselhoff danced on the Berlin Wall singing to the Germans that it was down, and Reagan's like, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall, and everybody was like, oh my God, East can meet West. Families could be reunited. People weren't just shot trying to cross the border, which was what's happening in East Germany, all underneath that kind of horrible situation. And Gorbachev and everybody, like, what happened when Medvedev made Putin prime minister, right? That's kind of when it all went south, isn't it? Is that right? Do I have that right?
Well, so it was Boris Yeltsin.
That's right.
Who
Yeltsin
appointed him prime minister in 1999, and then Yeltsin's health started failing, and he was grooming Putin for the presidency. And when he resigned as prime minister, Putin became acting president until he was officially elected in 2000, in the spring of 2000. Yeah. And he, by the Russian constitution, he could only do 2 terms as president directly, but it doesn't say consecutively, So he stepped down and became prime minister while Dmitry Medvedev was president for 4 years.
That's right.
And then he ran for president again, and he got it. Surprise, surprise.
Yes.
And then after another 2 terms, they decided to amend the constitution so that he could do a 3rd term.
That's what he's in right now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what's going on now.
So this is his total of like 4th term, though.
Yes. I'd have to do the math on that. But I want to say 08 to 12 was Medvedev, and then another 8 years, so 2020, and he had to amend the Constitution before 2020.
Yeah.
To get a 3rd term in a row. I think that's correct. I'd have to go back and double check.
Yeah,
on that.
It's right. I mean, really, he's just wanted to be, Vlad.
But getting back to our original topic, it's fascinating. The Russians have they've figured out how to spool their war machine up now. It's taken them 2 years and some change to finally spool up all of their defense industries. They had to fire a lot of corrupt people. They had to reinvent supply chains from scratch, but they are finally manufacturing munitions. And they are finally, they're not particularly good at building, like, let's say, smart bombs, especially not things that need like thermal optics and electrical optical.
Right.
But they can make dumb bombs in mass. They can make artillery shells in mass now, and they're producing that. And so they're, for the first time, they can engage in these artillery exchanges, around the Ukrainians, and kind of pressure the Ukrainian line on all fronts. And for the more sophisticated stuff, they're working with China. And this is part of how do they evade sanctions? Well, they trade enormously with the Chinese and the other BRICS. So, the BRICS are it's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. But they've have some new members now, including Egypt, the United Arab Emirates,
Belarus.
I can't remember if Belarus is or not. It might be. I know Iran is, and I think Argentina was invited, but their new president elected against it. But essentially, so they're all trading with each other, and so Russia is exporting in volume and importing in volume, mostly through the other BRICS countries, using them as third parties to get access to Western technology. The Chinese are a particularly interesting case in this, because the Chinese are a massive manufacturer of silicon and microchips. They're not particularly good at the intellectual property piece. They're not very good at designing new stuff. But they're, the relatively unsophisticated, 60 nanometer chips, 25 nanometer chips like that. Your 25 nanometer chip is probably what's in your car, right? The 60 nanometer chips, that's like what's in your kid's little Gigapet, or, whatever, or maybe, that's the kind of thing that's in like your microwave.
Your Game Boy. I'm trying to go old school. I was going to say Tecmo Bowl, but
there you go.
How far back?
Man, that was a great game.
Oh. Yeah, really, right? Blip, blip. I loved it, dude.
Yeah, Tecmo Bowl, Tecmo Super Bowl.
Yeah.
But they're, the Russians have figured out that you can take a relatively unsophisticated microchip, you can put that on a glider, and then you can attach that. You can build a fab glider around a 500-pound bomb, and you can glide that with relatively, good accuracy and a very cheap investment. You can glide that bomb down onto a target. Name that a Ukrainian tank or a bridge or whatever.
Right.
And that's
whatever it's within range. Yeah, whatever it can get to. So they're just turning with So they can make the old school stuff. The artillery. They can make shells. They can make the stuff that we're good at World War II stuff, probably a couple Kar 98s, and some AKs. Those were reverse engineered from the Sturmgewehr, right? So, I mean, really, that wasn't even their original creation. They had to take it from, the German, lines. And so, well, what would you like to give us as a positive for us watching this and listening? Where should we go if social media says, hey, this is what's happening? Should we check ourselves? Should we just be nice to one another?
Well, of course, I would love us to be nice to one another. But that's never going to happen as long as countries have divergent interests. And it's not a facet of who is elected nearly as much as it's a facet of what those people, in those respective countries see as their national interests, and those are always going to conflict with one another. The good news I can say, and I recently published a paper through Military Review called "Who in NATO is Ready for War," and it's the Poles have really stepped up to the plate in a big way. The Poles are now running a 6-division army. For comparison, the Germans, the French, and the British are all running about 3 divisions with some change. But, the Poles have arguably the most powerful land army in Europe right now. The Turks are also not to be fooled around with. The Turks have a 400,000 person army that is the second largest in NATO after the United States. They have a very sophisticated Air Force, and they've shown that they can project power in their near abroad in a very real way. And they have a young, bristling, healthy demographic, which means there's lots of young men that they can draft into the force if they want to. And those are both going to be very, very real checks against Russian aggression in Eastern Europe, in the Caucasus, and around the Black Sea. The Germans are now taking their defense a little bit more seriously. They're very acutely aware of their history. And so they never want to be in a situation where let's say the defense apparatus is setting national policy in Germany. But Boris Pistorius is doing a good job as defense minister in terms of, let's say, retraining their standing forces, somewhat updating their strategic planning and doctrine, and trying to iron out kind of the fraught defense industrial relationships that the Germans have, so that they can update their equipment and hardware and make sure that they have sufficient munition stockpile. And that's about the best we can expect from Germany.
Right. Germany even said, they're trying to have their own supply of everything. They don't want to have to be so reliant on the gases and all the natural gas and everything coming in from the pipeline. I do recall an article somewhere that I read where it was Germany has hey, how do we become self-sufficient ourselves? Don't have to depend on that pipeline, because if it got cut off or Europe gets cut off from any of those supplies.
They do deserve some credit too. I mean, they've basically elected to go into a depression. They're officially in a recession right now, but I think there's a depression ahead in their future. On the moral grounds that they can't do business with Russia anymore. Mm-hmm. And so the Germans, even though we have to heap some scorn on them, because the Russian ground forces were rebuilt with euro, like they were rebuilt off the funds the Russians got from oil and gas exports to Europe. But the Germans deserve some credit, because now that the Russians are at war with Ukraine, they've said, look, we will take the economic hit. We're not trading with them anymore.
No. And so they're trying to become self-sufficient. And, to the Germans out there that are doing that, at it, keep at it. Right.
Yep.
That's it. Straight up.
We will figure out what is going to happen with France in the near future here. They've gone through a very tumultuous election cycle. I don't think Macron, I think he was very unwise in how he orchestrated this, but the far, far left French has taken over, in France.
Yeah. That stop election, or come in and did a quick stopgap election or whatnot.
And we don't really know exactly what that's going to mean for French public policy, but I guarantee you that the French armed forces and the Armée de Terre is not going to, it's going to be a low funding priority. So we will have to see what form that takes. And then the Labour has come to power in Britain.
Right.
And the Tories have been wiped out in an unprecedented way. But that's a weirder circumstance as well, because maybe it's the smallest voter turnout for that election in history. And it's like no one wanted to vote for Labour, but they needed to punish the Tories. And so, the new prime minister is coming in, and we could say a lot about him, but for a defense, let's say for a defense analysis, I'm very, very skeptical that he's going to prioritize in their very fraught budget, funding land forces in any real sense. I would, given how fraught their budget is right now, and given how overtaxed the British public is, I would not be surprised if Britain downgraded their ground forces to a 2-division structure.
Interesting. And they're also dealing with kind of a civil, unrest over there right now, with a lot of, rioting in the streets, and, and they are having a shift in their government as well at the same time. Again, this is kind of like a perfect pot for bad actors to get involved and cause just so confusion and discourse over there, like we were talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. And, to be I am an institutionalist, not a populist in any sense, but one has to appreciate that populism only rears its head when policymakers are not taking care of the items that are important to the public. Mm-hmm. And populism goes away the moment you take seriously the legitimate concerns of the voters. And in the United Kingdom, they have not taken seriously in any way mass illegal immigration. Mm-hmm. And for them, that looks like 45,000, 55,000 people coming across the English Channel in boats and skiffs every year. And people are livid about it because they don't feel that they can make ends meet as it is. And these low-skilled and unskilled laborers compete in the workforce with the working class, especially in Northern England. And when they complain about it or they protest about it, they get called all the nasty things that you can imagine. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean they're all right. On the whole, immigration is a healthy thing, provided it does not. It has the appropriate controls in place so that it doesn't undermine the culture.
Sure.
And so that it's a net positive to the workforce and it does not create a deleterious effect in terms of wages.
Like there's accountant for it. It's like it's documented. Right. It's like done appropriately. And I understand that people want to flee persecution and famine and, they hear about, the golden brick roads in America. And, that's probably something that I have always taken for granted, that opportunity that I'm here, and all that. And I can only imagine someone trying to get over into England. I've been over there several times and, I've been told that I have more of a real British accent than people in England because so many people have just gone into the UK over time from all over the place with that access to their shores that they've changed the language to what we hear with the accent. Whereas not over here.
Yeah. It's astonishing.
Yes.
And that's a real volume of people.
It is. To change kind of the way you talk.
And they've delegated so much public policy making power out of Parliament now too. They're creating all of these artificial institutions that decide public policy by means of their own wisdom and education, and they're delegating these authorities out of Parliament as a. And the essential argument is that, well, no one in Parliament has the expertise, which, would beg the question, why don't you elect people with expertise then?
Right.
But when you delegate authorities to a single issue committee on climate change, let's say, and I happen to be in favor of reasonable carbon emissions, but one has to appreciate that that's a balancing process in public policy. We have to reduce carbon emissions at a certain acceptable level, but we also have to make sure that we don't drive up energy costs so that the average family doesn't suffer from, horrible living conditions and inflation. And, people have to be able to drive their kids to school. Parliament is elected to debate those issues in England and come up with some sort of a middle ground and a pathway forward. But when you create a climate change committee or a climate change panel that decides for the country what public policy is in that domain, there's no debate. They're a single issue committee, and they don't appreciate that politics is the art of trade-offs. And so this is driving populism. And it's going to get worse and worse until they take it seriously.
Yeah. Take it seriously, or else just, I don't know, man. That's crazy. You're cool. No, it's a cool conversation. I mean, like, we got into it. Okay. It's been an hour and 5 minutes. All right. I don't even know. It's like, hey, it's at an hour, but it's just going back and forth. And I just want to say, I have had you for an hour and so much time that I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to be here with us and share your insights and just knowledge and just your demeanor and just your, positive kind of persona. I really appreciate that. You say both sides, you give it how it is. And I like to try to be that way as well, you know, and I'm also a big believer in freedom of choice for each individual. And I think you kind of have that same vibe. So, go get that tattoo if you want it, but you don't have to make me get the same tattoo. That's freedom of choice. Okay.
That's a good way to say it.
It is. If you want it, get it, but hey, I might not. Okay. All right. Yeah. Now, your book, I'm going to read it. Hold on. Cause it's a title and I want my listeners out there to go check that out. Let me go back here. It's the last thing that was on was the Whalen, but you here. Oh, okay. Hybrid warfare, the Russian approach to strategic competition, and oh no, hold on. This is great. This is why we're human. Let me hold on one second. Where did it go? I just had you here. Hybrid warfare, the Russian approach to strategic competition and conventional military conflict the Russian way. That first part I had memorized. Okay. I tried to remember the second part of your title, which is and conventional material or military conflict. So I'm going to say it one more time for my listeners. Hybrid warfare, the Russian approach to strategic competition and conventional military conflict the Russian way by Curtis Fox, a wonderful guest and someone who's always welcome back on the show with more insight about this exact stuff we're talking about. You're always welcome.
Hey, Rad, it's been a great conversation. I'm sorry we had to wait 6 months to do it, man, but thanks for making it fun.
Yeah, you're awesome, and we'll do it again. It'll come and go. Don't you worry. I got you. All right, now with that said, and on behalf of my guest Curtis Fox and Brandon Webb, my chief managing editor of SOFREP.com, and Guy and Chris and everybody else, I want to mention that the loadoutroom.com is something that you should go check out. I'm going to be putting up articles there. We've got new authors that are going to be bringing new content like cave exploring, man. You want to see some crazy pictures? We got a guy that puts everything in and all he has is a photo of his feet sticking out. I don't even know. So that's coming to the loadoutroom.com. And again, thanks to Curtis for being here and taking the time out of his busy day. And we'll have him back on the show. And this is Rad saying peace.
You've been listening to SOFREP Radio.